Hello, my name is Nathaniel Haywood, and this is my research paper presentation for Communications 622. For this presentation, I will present to you my thesis claim that I used for my paper. I will follow that with my approach in regards to how I went about researching this. I will present to you the two key variables that make up my thesis claim, give you their definitions, and I will conclude with some research that helps fortify my initial claim. So, if we go to our first slide, we can go ahead and get started. First, my thesis claim. This was pretty simple, but it was heavy in that there was a lot of information about it. So it made my job to kind of see if I could fortify it a lot easier. My thesis claim is the following. Studies indicate there is one key element that must exist in order for leadership to be its most effective, and that is communication, primarily effective communication. If we go on to our next slide, I will provide you some information regarding how I went about researching this and why I looked for what I did. There were three key points that I needed to understand before I could certainly say this was true or not. The first was the complexity of leadership. I needed to know this because it just shows that despite the various interpretations of leadership, communication is integral in all of them, showcasing its pertinence and relevance. As you'll see eventually on the next slide, there were a lot of definitions for leadership. And the fact that communication popped up in further studies regarding most of them, it showed to me that the connection between leadership and communication was very significant. Next, I had to, of course, define leadership, give me an understanding of what it was, and that way you can go about saying whether I could go with it or not. Essentially, this was set to solidify the first point. In attempting to define leadership, the results showed how vast the source material truly is regarding leadership. Next, if the hypothesis held any weight, the result would have at least one commonality despite the uniqueness, the commonality, of course, being communication. And then finally, I had, of course, defined communication. This was of equal importance as it serves as the key component of the initial hypothesis, an element that pivotal to the argument warranted an accurate definition. So these were the three steps I had to carry out before I could truly understand the thesis claim that I was trying to make. So on to our next slide, we'll define leadership. And as I kind of alluded to in the prior slide, there are a lot of definitions regarding leadership. According to Peter Northouse, the author of our textbook, there are almost as many definitions of leadership as there are people who have tried to define it. Richard Bolden follows that with, everyone has their own intuitive understanding of what leadership is, based on a mixture of experience and learning, which is difficult to capture in a succinct definition. Essentially, with every researcher, with every interpretation, with every study, leadership has its own new, unique definition. So for the sake of this paper, this presentation, I narrowed it down to a couple that I felt best pictured what leadership truly was. But I took a unique approach. Instead of finding a definition of just leadership in general, I looked for what a definition of a leader. And I figured that would provide me a more detailed explanation of what leadership is. And the one that I felt was the most concrete and kind of encapsulated the whole image of leadership was a definition from Bruce Winston and Kathleen Patterson, who wrote, this is a long one, so bear with me. A leader is one or more people who selects, equips, trains, and influences one or more followers who have diverse gifts, abilities, and skills, and focuses the followers to the organization's mission and objectives, causing the followers to willingly and enthusiastically expand spiritual, emotional, and physical energy in a concerted, coordinated effort to achieve the organizational mission and objectives. Long story short, a leader takes a group with a unique skill set, unique traits, and helps them hone in on those abilities, helps them grow in them, but also helps them learn to best utilize those skills to help the group achieve a previously established mission. That's kind of the interpretation I had on this. A couple more definitions, one from Kevin Cruz here. He writes that leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. Dr. Robert Clinton wrote that leaders should relate to people in ways that will motivate and influence them. So a lot of commonalities that you see here regarding what achieving a goal, motivation, influence. But As I researched further, I found that you achieve those things, you help them hone in on those goals and those tasks by communication. And to segue into our next slide, I will define communication. Communication also has a multitude of definitions. I am a second year grad student here at Liberty University, and I can say that with every textbook I've read, every paper I've written, I'm sure some of you all can relate, we have seen a myriad of definitions regarding communication. Everyone has one. They're each different yet similar. It's fascinating, but there's so many definitions of communication, which kind of shows how complex it is as well. But the one that I went with kind of helps just hit it on the head for the sake of this presentation was one by Robert M. Lossie, who wrote, "Communication occurs only when there are at least two associated information producing processes, and the output from one process is the functional inverse of the other process's output." So just one working with the other, whether it be verbally or nonverbal. That's kind of the definition that I went with for my presentation, for my paper for communication. So on to our next slide. Here's the connection between the two. Leadership is not just connected to communication, it relies on it. David Clutterbuck and Sheila Hurst wrote, "It can be said that good leadership is mostly good communication." I mean, that is what my thesis is. Alan Bryman also wrote, "Allowing the opportunity to participate in key decisions and encouraging open communication were significant to effective departmental leadership." Leadership requires communication. I'm sure some of you have worked with leaders or group leaders or bosses who just never made it clear what they expected of you, what they wanted you to do, when they were happy with your work, when they were displeased with your work. And would you consider that person to be a good leader? Probably not, because leaders, as you go back to the first slide of definition, they make everything clear for you. They make their tasks clear. They motivate you. They help you with your abilities and help you push them to achieving a goal. And so if that's not being communicated properly, then how can a leader be considered effective or good? So in conclusion, it's just pretty much following suit with what my thesis was that leadership and communication are two concepts commonly found together. They share in the numerous amount of definitions and interpretations. However, their connection stems much further. Ultimately, all forms of effective leadership must display, and emphasis on the must, they must display signs of equally effective communication. So that's my presentation for you all. Thank you so much for watching and bearing with me. I hope you enjoyed and hope you learned something as well. I look forward to seeing what you all have to say. Thank you.